Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Slow Car Salon. In this one, we're doing some smaller jobs as well as preparing the transmission for getting bolted up to the engine. So let's get started. So next up are the valve covers. I'm going to be painting them with VHT Wrinkle Blue. This is a harder color to find, but it's going to turn out really nice. The cap is not at all representative of the actual color, but you'll see what it turns out to be when I'm finished. So, I'm going to pop them off, clean them up, and paint them. Okay, valve covers are nice and clean. As I was cleaning them up, I noticed these are actually painted. So, in order to get our VHT stuff to stick really well, I'm going to use aircraft paint remover. Now this stuff is extremely toxic, especially on your skin. It will burn if it gets on your skin. So if you're going to use this stuff, double glove, and make sure to use gloves that at least are long enough to go up your wrist. And to ensure that the paint remover does its job, I'm going to scuff the surfaces of the valve covers here with 60 grit sandpaper, and that should really help the paint stripper do its job. Well, that went pretty well. There seemed to be only a very, very thin coat of paint on it, so it was kind of annoying to get off, but enough damp paper towels seemed to do the trick. I'm going to go over the rest of it with 220, or I guess in this case, 240 grit sandpaper. Get the surface nice, put some etching primer on it, and then paint it blue. And now the final steps with the valve covers are to put in the new spark plug seals, and the PCV valve, which I'm just reusing the original one, and then the PCV valve grommet, which is brand new. Well, the bane of aftermarket parts comes to bite me in the butt. Putting these spark plug tube seals in was extremely painful. They were quite a tight interference fit, and trying to get them pressed down into the correct depth was also really tricky because there's no real way to stop them from getting punched all the way through when you smash them in there. So it took a little bit of finesse and evening out, and hopefully they'll do their job. It seems a little uneven in some cases, but one thing I'm not super happy about is how I ended up kind of killing my paint, but it'll be inside the spark plug tube channels, which you won't see once the engine plastics go on, so that should be okay. Okay, so I've just thrown the valve covers back on. I put the valve cover gaskets on just to make sure crud doesn't get into the heads while it sits. And then, yeah, I'll reseal it and put all the good silicone, do the cam seals and whatnot once I pull the cam belt assembly off and get that all finalized. And now we come back to the transmission. I already previously resealed the front and rear and also put new gasket material on the input shaft plate. However, with the new throwout bearing, which I've already gone ahead and put on the clutch fittings on, I took the original ones off, put the new ones in. I'll describe what I did there in just a little bit. Before I remember, ask me if the throwout bearing fits over the input shaft sleeve. And after taking a look at it and then trying to slide it on, the answer is no. So, unfortunately, I have to take this back off so I can cut it, but I'm going to put the adapter plate on and get everything lined up to see just about how much I have to cut, because I don't think I need to cut the whole thing, but we'll see. I want to just get the adapter plate on and take a look at it from there. So here's what I did in order to get the T56 throwout bearing prepared. It comes with these fittings originally. This one is the input and that one is the bleeder. In order to get this out, you have to press out that dowel pin, and then this will just slide out. And then this fitting, which comes with the XAT Racing kit, has a similar seal end to this, and will press right in there. You drive the dowel pin back in, and it's sealed. This one is a much simpler method of just loosening it and putting the new fitting in for the bleeder side. And that's all that really had to be done. Well, now I go to put the adapter plate on, and the sleeve is also stopping that from going on. So I guess I'll have to get it to basically its minimum depth there right before where the seal is. At least that'll make the cut real easy, but I'll have to make a real careful cut for sure. Well, that's one step closer, but yet also one step further. So I did end up chopping off the cylinder and resealing it, but I should have taken a look at the back of this thing and how, I guess, well, not deep the cuts are in it for the plate here for the input shaft, because even though I try to slide it on, it is fouling right there. So I totally didn't need to cut that, which is, I guess, a big rip, because no saving that now. But that means I think this thing is supposed to retain the input shaft and the main or secondary shaft bearing, which is in there. And I think that's all taken care of by the countersunk holes and whatnot in here. So since the gasket maker is still wet, I'm going to have to let it dry. Thankfully, that Toyota FIBRE is real good stuff, and it cleans up real easy. So I have to let this sit overnight, unfortunately, let it dry up, take it back off, clean it up, because I think it'll be much easier that way. All right, so it's been a day. The gasket stuff dried up. Now I was able to pull the input shaft plate off, clean up the surface, and I am also trying to remove this dowel pin right here, because that has to come out. So as we turn our attention back to the adapter plate, so here's what you have to do. You have to actually press a input shaft seal into the back of this. I just put a brand new OEM seal back there, and this whole thing will go on the front of the transmission, but only until after I remove this dowel pin, which I've been able to do by getting this vice grip on it and hammering it kind of in a circle, and that seemed to have loosened it up. So I'm going to try to wiggle it back and forth and pull it out. That was way easier than I thought. I just grabbed it with the vice grips, pulled it back and forth knocked it back and forth with the hammer until it could rotate, and then pulled it back and forth while tapping on the back of the vise until it popped out. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get this guy slid on. Beautiful. Now that's fitting. Cool. Line up all the holes and get started getting some of the hardware in here. Well, that went on real smooth. So hopefully that little episode kind of showed you some of my mistakes that I'm going through here, so you don't make the same ones. So to recap, don't put the input shaft plate on the transmission. Take it off entirely, don't cut it, and get a new seal and put it in your input shaft plate. Once you can do that, all your bolts will go in, your regular hex-headed screws will go here, and your countersunk ones, there'll be 3 down here. And now that leaves us with the next item, the throwout bearing. Now there are a number of bolt holes here, so we can mount it in different orientations. And I think based on the length of my clutch line, because I don't think it would reach all the way across the engine bay then come on this side of the transmission like the old one did, I think I'm going to make it so that the fittings exit on the other side. So we slip that on, Let's see what kind of alignment I can get. Okay, I think that's gonna be it. And looks like these are pointing upwards. Do I have enough clearance from that bolt? Barely. I wonder if there are any other orientations that are possible here. Because I would like these fittings to exit in that direction. All right, well, unfortunately, mounting it with these fittings in the other direction, unfortunately, does not work. So I'm gonna mount them this way, and that does provide plenty of clearance. And just to test it out, I did try to thread on this clutch line here, and it doesn't contact or foul with the bolt. So that's good, and that makes me might have to rethink how I'm going to route the clutch line. Might even have to get a longer one, we'll see. But anyway, with that, I'm gonna Loctite these two bolts that hold it in, and then we're gonna slide the bell housing on. Look at that. This is very nicely adapted. The 1UZ bell housing is now on. I'll secure it up. It uses 4 hex bolts up here around the tops, and then 2 larger Allen-headed bolts. And they all have nuts that go on the back. Even though the plate is threaded, I guess they add the nuts in there for you so you can have some extra security, which is fine. Otherwise, now all I have to do is figure out exactly where I'm going to drill to allow the clutch lines to pass through here. Might have to grind away a little bit at these fins right here. But otherwise, I should be able to at least, with this bottom one, kind of start the line outwards a little bit and then kind of feed it through here. But this one's pretty close, so I may have to grind some metal away right here and then drill into the bell housing here. All right, so quick note here about the hydraulic throwout bearing. I previously had it oriented such that the ports were pointing out in this direction. However, this was incorrect. A member on the forum mentioned that the bleeder should be above the input, of course, to allow air bubbles to come up and be bled out. Now, this actually should help my case a little bit in terms of positioning of the line for the input, as I was having concerns about the length of my clutch line from the master cylinder. So instead of my holes being over on this side for the lines, they'll now be up through here, which, like I said, should help my case. So I'm glad I was able to get some help in finding and correcting this mistake. Okay, now it's time to drill the holes through the bell housing for the clutch lines. I've already started making a couple of pilot holes up here. I've also taped off the bleeder and input lines so that crud doesn't fall into them. And I'm going to just start drilling from the outside. There's my 2 pilot holes again, and progressively work up to a larger size so that the clutch line can fit through them. Well, that takes care of that. I had to break out my humongous 5/8" drill bit to make sure the hole was big enough for the clutch line to go through. I'd also recommend covering up your input shaft and throwout bearing and whatnot, because more crud got on especially inside the splines there than I thought. But that's easily cleanable. But just my note to you, if you're doing the same thing, cover that guy up. Anyways, well, that's where the clutch lines are going to exit from. And if I take a testing clutch line, this is just a small bleeder line. We can slip it through up on the top, like so, and down here, like so. And then I'll have to find some kind of grommet or other way to perhaps seal this up, because I don't want to get too much crud coming into the bell housing space where the clutch is, but we'll see how I work that out, because for now, at least, I got these all ready to go. All right, so I'm running into actually a couple of issues here, particularly with where I placed my holes for the clutch lines to come through, and also where I clocked my slave cylinder and how close it came in proximity to that bolt, which I've now removed, because with it there, it unfortunately fouled with the clutch line, even though, yeah, this is only one of the few positions I can choose based on where the holes are in the adapter plate. So if I put it there, then yeah, my fittings line up with the exit holes for the clutch lines, but then yeah, I have the issue with that bolt fouling. So either I'm going to run without that bolt or find one of similar thread size and get one with a shallower head. See if I can find something at the hardware store. But that's all I had to do, and I also had to go in there with a file and a Dremel and try to get the holes a little better lined up with the fittings, because otherwise the clutch lines will have to make a little bit of a curve as they go in there. But that should be okay. Okay, so now I got the slave all fitted up without any interference along the lines or anywhere along where the holes are for the lines to go through. And it's because I dremeled out the holes a little bit more, and I figured out a solution to the too tall of a bolt without having to really go anywhere or dip into a stash of any sort. What I did is I got one of the original bell housing bolts, I cut the captive washer off of it, and then also cut a few more threads into the non-threaded part of the top of the bolt, and then just used that. And now we have plenty of clearance between the clutch line and the bolt. So that pretty much concludes preparing the transmission. Now it's pretty much ready to be bolted onto the engine. Now another thing we need to look at is relocating the brake proportioning valve. Now, I already went ahead and mounted the Wilwood proportioning valve right here on an existing threaded hole on the shock tower on the left-hand side of the car. It's actually really perfect because the output from the master cylinder for the rear lines is here. So I can make a small line that goes across into the input of the proportioning valve, and then out, and then back across the firewall and into this pink labeled line that will take the pressure from the master cylinder all the way back to the rear brakes. And I'll show you what I'm going to use in order to make this happen. So here's what we're working with. This is 3/16" copper nickel brake line. Now, it's going to be just as durable and corrosion resistant as the factory steel lines on your car. However, these are much softer, which bend much more easily, which is great for these little DIY jobs. To make the flares, we're going to be using the Snap-on Blue Point metric double flaring tool. Now, if anything brake related, you want to use quality stuff, especially a brake flaring tool like this. Do not resort to Amazon or eBay for these types of tools. At no point do you want any of the flares or connections that you made to fail, especially on your brakes. This is a fully metric kit, and I'm going to be using only metric for our metric adapters. And we're going to be using mostly these M10 black colored adapters, as most of the fittings in the engine bay are going to be M10. And of course, to shape them, a brake line bending tool. Now, you want to have one that has guides specifically for the 3/16" brake line, because if you use something else or something that's too small, or maybe even like, say, the edge of your table to make the bend, you will most likely kink the line, and if there's a kink, you'll have less fluid flow, and nobody likes that. So get yourself the proper tool. I'll post all the links in the description, of course, for all these products so you can get them too, or even find some other alternative that you might like better. So this is the line that's going to go from the master cylinder to the proportioning valve. It was initially about 9 inches long. I would recommend making your flares before you make the bends. I think that's the best course of action. I made the bends and then made my flares, but the flares, thankfully, actually came out really, really well. They have the nice chamfer to them, the sealing surface is flat, and I got the right fittings on them, of course, before you make your flares. Put the fittings on before you make the flares. And this is now supposed to go in here, like so. And I'll have to obviously connect those two up, and they're not going to be fully aligned until I start screwing them in, but that's going to be this first and very short line. All right, that fit in excellently. While it may look like this flare right here is not quite inside the fitting for the proportioning valve, it is. It's just that this fitting here is just a little shallow, but this is in all the way. So next I have to make the line that will go from here, from the output of the proportioning valve, and over to that pink painted line here. I'm going to have to bend the steel line up and then add a similar metric coupling like so, like I'm going to have to make to in order to connect the existing front line that goes across, and like that, which I've already tried to bend a little bit to get straight, and connect there. So it looks like, because it's way longer than where the connection point is, I'm going to take the entire line off, cut it at around here next to where that fitting is, and re-flare it. So after getting that first piece done, I was able to learn the process and get it down. So here's the next step. So this is the line that I'm going to be making that's going to go from the end of the proportioning valve and then to the line that connects with the car. It's about 52 inches long, and I've marked the end of where I'm going to cut it right here with the tape. And so I have a pipe cutting tool right here that I'm going to use to cut it with. So with that on, the idea is that we clamp on the roller with the blade onto the pipe and then twist the tool around the pipe in order to make a clean and precise cut. And as we rotate the tool, you're going to turn the handle just a little bit more to tighten down the roller on the pipe some more. You can see we're getting a pretty darn good cut there, so I think it's almost ready to go. Okay, so the score that I got in the pipe is not as deep as I thought it was because the tool only goes down to a 1/4 inch diameter, but this is 3/16, which is slightly smaller. But we can bend the pipe off, and kind of like you're bending a paper clip back and forth to break it in half. Although this is, like I said, much softer, so it won't need nearly as much force to do so. Now next is to take the deburring tool and insert it into the pipe and add some pressure and deburr the inside of the line. That'll make sure to get all the metal shavings off the inside and make sure we have a really nice and clean area, so when we actually put the flaring tool in it, we won't have any chunks making scores or changing the geometry of the flare. Once that's done, then we're going to take a file and then make a chamfer, or a 45-degree chamfer on the outer edge of the pipe. And now with that done, don't forget to do the other side. All right, now that both ends of the line are prepped, now we're going to add the flare. But before we add the flare, always add your fittings on first. I'm going to put 2 fittings on, one for either side. Make sure they're pointing in the correct direction, like so. So we're going to have this one for this end and that one for the other end. Now next is to put the line in the appropriate size guide in the tool, which is this one here. So I'm going to lay it in like that. And then the depth that it must go must be to, here's the die for the 3/16 inch size line. Now you want to make sure that the end of the pipe lines up with that ridge right there where the end of my thumbnail is. So we got to move that line just a little bit further back. So let's see if we can get this right with one hand. A little further back. There we go, that's perfect. Perfectly aligned. And now with the line in, you're going to clamp down the tool onto the line. And you're going to get that down to where, when you tighten the little clamp, the T-bar clamps here, we're going to get the tool as even as we can. You see the gap is a little shorter on this side versus that side. And once the T-bars have been like kind of hand tightened, give them a 1/4 turn more to really make sure that they have proper torque on them. Then slip the clamp over the tool, put the die inside the tube, and then we're going to put the clamp over the end of the die like that, and then start clamping down on it until the end of the die hits the flat surface of the clamp. And with that done, we can take the die off, and that leaves us with the initial bubble flare. Now that that's done, you're going to take the clamp tool and put it back on without the die, and this part of the clamp will then force the inside of the bubble back in, and that will finish the flare. And now with that step done, we take the clamp out, like so, and there you go. There's your finished brake flare. Now then the fitting will come down the end of the line like so, and seal up against whatever fitting you have on your vehicle. Now, of course, having the correct and good high-quality tool matters a lot, because otherwise your flares may not come out right, it may damage the lines, they may be off-center. So making sure you get some money into a really decent tool like this really, really helps. And it'll make the job way easier. Rinse and repeat for the other side, and then you've got yourself 2 very nice double flares for your brake lines. So that wraps up the custom brake lines that I need to make. I also was able to break out my special riv nut tool and put a M6 insert so I could add a P-clamp there. That way I can get my line nicely secured, and there we go. There's the 2 brake lines that I needed to make. Now, I don't have another one of the metric unions, so I can't, unfortunately, connect this brake line with that one, and they'll be joined together like so. But once I get that in, then I can connect that up. But there you go. Brake lines. I have to say, it was a little nerve-wracking at first, but with the right tools, it'll actually go really, really smoothly. All right, so that's a wrap on this one. Thanks for sticking with me through this jam-packed episode. I hope I'll see you in the next one, because we're going to deal with what's going to go in here.